Alright, so this is going to be my review of Elvis Nixon. This is a movie that came out about a few weeks ago, I think, and I saw this actually with my grandparents. We went real quick before I go into the actual review. Let me talk about the theater I went to, because this was an interesting experience. The theater I went to was this little itty-bitty theater that had been around since 1927, I believe, and it had been refurbished, right? The problem is that it got refurbished and it looking like something like the Haunted Mansion. It literally looked like something like the waiting room for the Haunted Mansion, and the ceiling was made to look like it had stars in the sky. And it didn't help that when you enter the theater, there's a guy playing on an organ in there. So I was like, are we going to go on a ride? I don't know. Anyway. So for those who don't know, let's go into the actual movie review. So for those who don't know what this movie is about, this film is actually about, revolves around a picture of Elvis Presley and Richard Nixon. That is the most requested picture from the White House. And this is an actual thing that happened in, I believe, 1970? Yeah, I think 1970. And this revolves around when Elvis, this is all true, well, most of it's true, is that when Elvis just went up to the west gate, the northwest gate, and said, I want to meet the president. I can't do Elvis. As you all know, I suck at impressions. So, Elvis went to go see Nixon, and, yeah. Now, what I found funny about this film from the get-go is that Elvis is played by Michael Shannon, who most of you guys would know best as General Zod from Man of Steel. And Richard Nixon's played by Kevin Spacey, who most of you guys would know as Frank Underwood from House of Cards. But for those who do know his movie career, he played Lex Luthor in Superman Returns. So I find it hilarious that you have two people who played Superman villains, and they're playing these two iconic. Now they're playing two iconic people from history, whereas before they played arguably Superman's two greatest enemies. So I found it completely hilarious that, you know, there's a moment when they first meet, and I was like, now they're going to talk about how they're finally going to kill the son of Jor-El. That didn't happen. I don't know, I just found that completely hilarious. I just found it kind of funny. But yeah, this movie really delves into, you know, the kind of life. This feels more like it's an Elvis movie than it is a Nixon movie, even though it's about them together. It feels more like it's Elvis's movie. Because, yeah, this really goes into Elvis's, you know, life. And this is 1970. He's now working Vegas. He's, you know, this is 7 years before his death. There's, you know, he's arguably, like, one of the biggest people in the world. And it's pretty cool. I think this was really cool to to do a film around this point in time, because Elvis is like bigger than himself. What I also like about this movie is that this really does play with more of the notion that this actually has a lot of focus also, not just on Elvis and Nixon, but also as the people who worked with Elvis and Nixon, because actually, for those who don't know, this film had a lot of say and help from the members of Nixon's cabinet, as well as a few of Elvis's surviving friends. And they've had a lot of say in the film, and I think some of them were producers, actually. But anyway, I'm going to talk about Michael Shannon as Elvis. Granted, yeah, he looks nothing like Elvis, but I'll say this: he actually gets the mannerisms, and he gets the mannerisms as well as like the hand motions that Elvis did. He was like even though he didn't look like Elvis, he really did act like Elvis, and you could believe his performance of being Elvis Presley. So I really liked that. I really liked how it really did feel like you were looking at Elvis, even though, he didn't look like Elvis. I don't know how much of it is true, but it is. I think it was really interesting. And it's a little known fact that Elvis Presley was a very conservative person. He was very conservative. He absolutely loved his country. And he in 1970, there was, the Black Panthers, there was drugs, there was, the hippie move, there was hippies, he also didn't really care much for the Beatles either. Tragically, he was not a fan of the Beatles, especially John Lennon. Anyway, but I thought it was really cool how we really got to see that that side of Elvis, and we got to see from his friends' perspectives of what they thought of Elvis as well, of what they themselves thought of Elvis and living in this larger-than-life world. Johnny Knoxville's in this film, and he plays one of Elvis's closest friends, Sonny. And, yeah, Johnny Knoxville does really good. But I think the one guy who really became the person, who became that person, is Kevin Spacey as Richard Nixon. He gets Nixon's mannerisms, his movements, everything. I remember watching the behind the scenes of the film before it came out, and one of Nixon's members of his cabinet, who was advising on the film, saw Kevin Spacey's performance. He's like, "Oh my God, it's like Nixon walked right back into the Oval Office." And I really like that. Like, in the moment, like, the first moment I realized, yeah, he's going to be, Kevin Spacey as Richard Nixon's going to be awesome. It was when in the opening scene where he's talking to two members of his cabinet, and he's like, at 1 p.m., you have a meeting with Elvis, the rock star? Yeah. And then he throws his glasses down, he's like, is this a fucking joke? Oh, man. This is a really good comedy film. There's also some great drama, because again, you really get to delve, especially into Elvis's mind, of what it was like to be at that point in Elvis's life. Because you have to remember, Elvis was probably the biggest, and still to this day, the biggest, entertainer in the world. I can only imagine the second being Michael Jackson. So in that world, Elvis says it best. When people, he's talking to his friend Jerry, and he says, when people look at me, they don't see Elvis. They see, their wedding song, the heartbreak, getting their first kiss, their first kiss, and all that. They don't see Elvis Presley. When they look at you, Jerry, they just see Jerry, and and you can clearly tell that he's envious of that. Like, he, even though he loves the fame of it all, he wants to be seen as Elvis Presley, as just Elvis. Yeah. But yeah, I do like how in this we get to see that Elvis behind it all. He's a little out of there. I think at this point, yeah, that he was taking drugs, even though he was getting them from a doctor. They were pain medicine. He himself didn't think they were drugs because they were prescribed by a doctor. Even though, yeah, drugs are bad. Painkillers are bad. Okay. So yeah, the whole story's around Elvis trying to become a federal agent at large, which I don't know if that's a real thing or not. And he wants to get a badge and become an undercover agent for President Nixon's group. And it was really cool, even though, Elvis, Nixon comes from this very different, time period, he's very much different. They're both very conservative. And this is an interesting thing, because they have a conversation about, what America's about in their perspective, and they say, people just, expect everything to be handed out to them, where, Nixon's telling Elvis this, and he says, look where I am now and look where you are. We got here because we put the blood, sweat, and tears and effort into becoming what we are. And I really like that, because that in some way that really does harken true, because you do see that, kind of around the world, and, some people in this world really do think they can just get a handout and walk away from it all. So I thought that was interesting, and I like how it plays it fair. It does play it fair and doesn't hit you over the head that, right means right, right wing means right way. It doesn't hit you over the head that at all. It does play it fair. Like, yeah, we've run into our own shares of problems, and we're going to continue to run into our own share of problems that we've made, but we've got to power through it. So I like that. All in all, this is a very fun movie, probably one of my favorite movies. I walked out of there liking this more than either of my grandparents did, and I thought, I don't get to see them much, and I thought, let's go see a movie, and, they thought it was going to be, Elvis Presley and Nixon, this ought to be fun, and they honestly didn't know that this wasn't a real thing. They didn't know that this was a real thing. They just thought, it's just a weird movie where Elvis meets President Nixon. They didn't know that all the stuff behind it. But yeah, all in all, this was a really fun movie. I thought it was just going to be okay. I ended up liking it. I think this was only about an hour and a half, like hour 40 tops. This is not a long movie, but it is definitely a fun movie. But it's a lot of it's a mixture of comedy and drama. because there are some pretty just kind of sad moments, especially with Elvis on his own. There's actually a few moments before Elvis actually meets Nixon, where he's kind of trying to prep himself for having a speech without, trying to introduce himself to President Nixon. I don't want to spoil that because it's a very, somber place, but I thought that was an interesting place to go with Elvis. But anyway, so there you go, guys. I didn't know I was going to go, and I ended up seeing this movie, and I ended up really liking it. If you're not really, if you're not really into, like, historical dramas or drama comedies, yeah, I'm going to give this a pass. This is not going to be a movie for everyone. But anyway, so once again, hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you guys later.